just imagine if you're someone who really thinks that abortion is akin to murder, right? That there is no difference between killing a fetus at the 8-week stage and killing a fully developed human being. If you think that, then you think our society is just spectating on a Holocaust that has been going on for your entire life. And it's easy to see how someone would not be moved by hate and would in their own mind be moved by compassion and love and a concern for divine retribution if they believe that God is watching all the while.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's extreme to say that. See, you could say the same thing about restricting the rights of gay people. That it's really love, because that's a sin in a lot of people's hearts, and therefore
sanely, you can say the same thing about members of ISIS who were throwing gay people off of rooftops. Some of you must have seen this footage of ISIS members hugging, with apparent sincerity, the people they were about to hurl off of rooftops.
Because it's a loving act.
This was not a naked declaration of hate. This was, sorry, this is how the game is played. We have to do this.
Well, that represents to me that, I mean, that's the paradox. So, and I don't know if I've said it before on stage with you, but Steve Weinberg, who's a physicist friend, a Nobel laureate, and also an atheist, has said that there are good people and there are bad people. Good people do good things, bad people do bad things. When good people do bad things, it's religion. Yeah. And I think, there's a lot of truth to that. So the people are, and it's not just religion, it's ideology. Whenever people move away from reason and justify, and we all do it, but justify bad actions, and as if I think very few people do bad things thinking they want to do a bad thing.
Right.
They're doing it for some reason that they think is a good reason.
Well, we can go right back to Voltaire to address all this, which is if you can get people to believe absurdities, you can get them to commit atrocities.
Yeah.
And once you have poisoned the foundation, which I think is a hallmark of what many religions do, of right and wrong, of about how we should go about determining what is a moral good, if you poison that sufficiently, that's how you get people to do that. That's how you get them to bomb abortion clinics. That's how you get them to throw homosexuals off roofs. Which kind of brings us to one of the questions. We polled a little bit. I asked for suggestions on Facebook, and Sam had asked on Twitter. And there's a couple things that keep coming up. But I think, given what we're talking about, this issue of morality terrifies believers. I've been told that atheists can't be moral. And then the people who have put like another half second of thought into it will say, well, of course you can be moral, but you can only be moral because you were raised in a Christian environment that taught you about morals. And I gave a talk for a number of years, but you wrote The Moral Landscape. And I want you to just take a couple of minutes and give a summation of objective reality, science-based assessments, and why people don't have to be terrified, and why it may in fact be more terrifying if morals are just the dictates of some individual or being.
Well, it's clearly more terrifying if the Bible is true or the Quran is true, because then the universe has been created and is now governed by an omniscient sadist. Right? He's created a universe with hell to be populated by people who he didn't give enough evidence to convince them of the truth of his doctrine. Right? So he could have just given enough evidence and we'd all be fundamentalist Christians or Salafi Muslims. But the miracles are always thousands of years old, or they're in India, or strangely they're in places where...
Same place UFO sightings are.
Or upstate New York.
Okay. But they're not sort of like the UFO abductions and the cattle molestations. It could happen right here, right now, in front of 2,000 educated people, and we would all be convinced. But that's not going to happen for some perverse reason.
I'd still be skeptical.
Yes.
I'd still be skeptical.
We would still be. We would
you
demand.
can imagine if you're in dialogue with an omniscient being who's bent upon convincing you for your own good. That can happen very quickly.
I'm talking to you right now.
Well, apparently, I'm dumbing it down a lot.
But to tie into what he's saying, I've had Christians tell me that God wouldn't reveal himself to me because I would continue to question, deny. And I'm like, what kind of weak-ass God do you believe in who is incapable of convincing me? Oh, you're just too damn obstinate.
So let's leave that. So we can leave that aside. There's something strange about believing that these books, as written, give you a truly moral worldview that you would endorse. If any person behaved the way the God of the Bible behaves, that is our definition of a psychopath and a sadist.
Yeah.
But the reason why you can have objective morality, or I think that you can have a few short steps to objective morality, and what I mean by objective is not that it's all just a matter of atoms. The universe includes subjective experience, includes consciousness is a natural phenomenon. Consciousness is a property of the universe. We don't know exactly at what stage it emerges in information processing in complex systems, or maybe it goes even deeper than that. I mean, it's totally possible that there's some spooky view of consciousness going further down than vast numbers of neurons or information processing units doing their thing. There's no especially good reason to believe that, I would say.
A lot of good reasons not to believe that.
Yes, but still, it's not. The jury is arguably still out on that. What it's not still out on is a few fundamental questions. One, clearly consciousness exists. Even if we're living in a simulation on some alien hard drive, something seems to be happening, right? And that seeming is what I'm calling consciousness. So even if you're a brain in a vat right now, or you're in the Matrix, or this is all just a dream and you're going to wake up in a few minutes and find yourself in bed, no matter how confused you might be about your circumstance, there is still consciousness and its contents in each moment. And there is a vast difference between excruciating and pointless misery and sublime happiness and creativity and joy and love and all of the good things in life. And we have no idea how far that continuum actually goes in both directions, but we really know, that we like one side of it much better than the other side of it. And we don't have to justify that preference. You don't have to justify preferring the happiest possible life to being tortured for eternity, right? And the idea that you would need some philosophical argument to justify that is just a specious claim that has confused a lot of people. And the idea that you would need to be able to draw your preference there, again, for avoiding the worst possible misery for everyone, that you'd have to draw that from some book that has been dictated by an omniscient being, that also is a specious claim. So I view morality as a kind of navigation problem, and the reason why this is of a piece with ultimately a scientific understanding of the mind and a scientific understanding of human well-being and of conscious systems generally is that navigating between these two ends of the continuum of experience, avoiding the worst possible misery and finding true bliss and creativity and connection and love, there are right answers about how to do that for properly constituted minds. And for us, there are biochemical answers, there are psychological answers, there are sociological answers, there's economic answers, political answers. Every piece of human knowledge that's legitimate knowledge has to be brought to bear on the question of how to live a fulfilling life. And it is possible to be wrong, and it's possible to not know what you're missing, and it's possible to be right for the wrong reasons. And so every permutation of ignorance and confusion is there to be suffered and endured, and we have to break the spell of thinking that we need to live forever shattered by tribal dogmatisms in order to talk about there being right answers to moral questions.
As Sam knows, we had another Origins event where Sam was at talking about exactly this and had a bunch of
We got a lot of pushback from
we got a lot of pushback.
philosophers,
Yeah, but so I think that, I've had a lot of discussions about this since then, and it may be, and it is probably true that reason is the slave of passion for most people. We possess reason, but reason doesn't necessarily drive our actions.
Yeah.
And we justify things after the fact on the basis of what we want it to be, and then we come up with a rational argument for it. I think that's true.
Understanding that is another exercise of reason.
Exactly. And
For clarity, there's flawed reasoning, but that doesn't mean that reason itself is flawed.
No, but I think we're capable, and you and I and everyone in this audience does it. That we all rationalize our lives every day. We wake up, we rationalize that we like our work or our spouse or whatever else it is in order to get through the day. And
let it be known that I didn't nod my head to that.
Yeah, that's right. Good. Let it be noted. But
It's only audio.
And so I'm not 100% convinced that you can always get ought from is, as some famous philosopher once said. But I do think I agree with you completely that it's a process that without is, you can't get ought. I think that's the point. Without is, you can't get ought. If you don't know the consequences of your actions in any way, and that's what science is. Science tells you reason, but I view science as sort of reason based on empirical evidence. Then you can't possibly make decisions that you can't determine what's right or wrong.
You need to know what the goal is and what the outcome is going to be.
What the outcome is going to be. So without a careful understanding of and then some people call this utilitarianism, I guess, but I just see it as without science there can be no morality, in my opinion, or no sensible morality. And I think what we've seen, and G. Pinker and others have argued, I think, pretty effectively, that in some ways the Enlightenment and rational thinking has led to a world where some things that were once thinkable are not thinkable now. And so there's no doubt, I don't know whether I would argue that we can, certainly I would argue that we might not be able to understand morality now, but that's irrelevant because we agree that not understanding something is not evidence of anything but not understanding. Right. The more we learn, the more we will understand. So I do think ultimately we'll have a neural understanding of almost all our decision-making capabilities. But certainly without that reason, I don't think you could even discuss the question.
Right. Well, let me just take 1 minute to say why I think this is-ought business is totally confused. This comes from a paragraph in Hume's work where he was actually trying to hold religious conceptions of morality at bay. And I think it's been misinterpreted, it's certainly been overused as one of these exports from philosophy that has just gotten into the heads of everybody and is influential, totally out of proportion to its actual validity. One thing I would point out is that Hume said he found many seeming paradoxes, and one was with respect to causation.
Yeah.
And if you took him seriously about causation, you couldn't really take science very seriously, because apparently there's no evidence of causation in the world. We just see the contiguity of various events, but we never see causes between A and B. So this is-ought business. Let's say there is no ought, there is no should, there is no obligation to do anything in this universe. There is just what is. There's just the totality of facts that are actual and perhaps possible, perhaps also impossible. Whether there's such a real thing as possibility, or everything is in fact actual, it's just happening in a parallel universe, right? Or trillions upon trillions of such universes. There are only facts. And the first thing I would ask you is, if you can't get your sense of how you should live from the totality of facts, all of reality, where do you think you can get this sense of how you should live? So you're not impoverished having all the facts of the universe at your disposal. Yeah. And you still have, even if there's no such thing as morality, we still have this navigation problem. Put your hand into a wood chipper and see how much you like it, right? Yeah. You will very quickly get the message that you don't want to do that again. You will want to avoid that. And there are an infinite number of ways in which we can experience pointless misery from which no good comes. And we will find ourselves navigating, and all I'm arguing is that we call morality those subset of behaviors and commitments that relate in social space to this navigation problem of finding better lives together. And if you were alone on a desert island, you wouldn't call it morality, but you would still talk about well-being and happiness.
I agree completely. I guess the question is one of what one calls objective morality, if you want to use those terms. In the sense that everything you said, I think, is clearly true. The question I would have is that at the same time, because that navigation effort is sort of has an evolutionary basis as well as a cultural basis, I think.
We know evolution is wrong on most of these questions.
Yeah, but I think that our thinking has an evolutionary basis, and I don't think that. I think it's clear that that's the case.
Yeah.
Then it means to me that morality is a moving target too. The question is so that humans are hardwired, I think, to find some things moral and not, and that's an interesting question to find out how they are. And as you know, some psychologists do test the famous trolley car experiment, and so. When one talks about objective reality, I think it's based on a totality of experience, but that totality of experience evolves, and therefore I'm a little more hesitant at talking about absolute morality.
Yes.
Well, no,
I don't use absolute.
Yeah, but it's evolving into a space of right and wrong answers and real facts about the conscious experience of actual and possible beings. So there's a right answer to the question of, if you were going to ask, if I add this compound to my neurochemistry, is it going to make me happier or not, right? Mm-hmm. Insofar as we could come to some kind of completed neuroscience of happiness, well, then we would understand more and more about the likelihood of you helping or hurting yourself that way. But so too with any use of your attention. If I'm in this relationship, am I going to be happier or not? There are right and wrong answers there, whether or not you discover them.
You discover them after the fact.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but you don't know what you're missing, right? Like you don't know what in a counterfactual situation you could have done something yesterday that would have made today much better than it was for you, and you may never know what you missed. And again, so it's realism for me, so whether it's scientific realism or moral realism, just amounts to the claim that it's possible to be wrong. It's possible not to know what you're missing. It's possible for everyone to be wrong. Like every physicist alive, you could ask some pressing question about physics, and I don't know how many physicists there are, 30,000. All 30,000 could be wrong, and then tomorrow someone could be right.
And I get letters every day from those people who say they are. But
how many physicists are there?
That's the whole. But that's it's interesting you brought up this example because that's the whole point of science.
Exactly. Yeah.
The whole point of science. If you couldn't be wrong, there would be no science. The whole point of science, is to go in and try and prove your colleagues wrong in some sense. That's how science perceives, because it doesn't prove things right. It only proves things wrong. And then you narrow down what's left over. And so you're absolutely right. And that's what makes empirical evidence so useful. That's why it should be the basis of public policy, because you can find out what doesn't work. Yeah. That's an essential part of living, but also it's what makes science powerful and worth utilizing in every aspect of our experience, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Thanks. There's a couple things about the moral issue, and I'm glad you guys made the points. People confuse objective morality with absolute morality. None of us, I assume, I know Sam and I aren't advocating for absolute morality. Actually, situational ethics is probably the term that I use most often. When I talk about objective morality, I just mean that it's not just subject to your whim or any subjective experience. Because one of the objections we get when you say you don't want to put your hand in a wood chipper, somebody will come along and say, well, somebody might want to do that. Who are you to decide what's right for them? We're speaking in general rules. We are physical beings in a physical universe with rules that dictate what the consequences of our actions are.
And if there really were a masochist who wanted to do that, there would be a complete scientific understanding of masochism that's possible.
Yeah, sure.
And it's possible that there's a way of being a masochist that admits of equivalent well-being, say. I highly doubt this is the case, but let's say that was the case. So having right and wrong answers to questions of morality, and this is why I use this analogy of a moral landscape, it doesn't mean there's just one right answer for everybody. There could be many, a functionally infinite number of peaks on this landscape, but there are even more wrong answers. There's a larger infinite set of wrong answers, and you know when you're not on a peak, and because your hand is in the wood chipper, and it turns out you're not one of those masochists who likes it.
So the one question that you've been hammered with, that I've been hammered with, is, you're talking about objective morality, but your foundation of morality is well-being. Now, when it comes to the is-ought problem, I jokingly and fallaciously pointed out that you may not be able to get from an is to an ought, but I can get from two is's to an ought. Because if I know what the goal is and I know what the consequences of my action is, or the consequence of my action is, then I can tell what I ought to do to achieve that goal, which was a good way to sum it up. There's a problem in there that I'm not going to get into. But I believe I understand what you assessed in Moral Landscape, which is kind of my view of this, is, under what basis, what objective basis have you decided that well-being is the standard? And I think you said, what other standard could there be? That's the thing about secular moral systems, is they have at their foundation the goal of getting better. And even if I pick three premises that are going to serve, I can pick them arbitrarily. Death is preferable to life. And you can work through and do thought experiments to see, does that get you towards a better world? But all this little bickering about better world, who defines better, what's better, well-being, has anybody in all, from your detractors, suggested another non-God's dictate, divine command foundation that would be better than well-being? And if they did, how would you respond?
Well, there's two ironies here. One is that the religious answer is also predicated on well-being. I mean, when you ask religious people what's wrong with going to hell for eternity, right? It's because it's too hot there. Right? Like you don't want to be there. Heaven is much better. It's a story about some eternal circumstance of well-being or its antithesis that awaits us after death. Now, if that were true, if there was good reason to believe in the Christian heaven or the Muslim paradise, I would be the first to say that it's really important to live so as to place the right bet on eternity. I mean, what's 70 years compared to eternity of suffering or happiness? But it just so happens that there's no good reason to believe in those after-death states. But they're still talking about consciousness and its contents and the difference between misery and well-being. And for me, the definition of well-being is truly open-ended. It's there to be refined and further discovered. And I think there are possibilities of well-being that we can't imagine. The other irony here is that when people say that you have this assumption that well-being is good or worth finding, as though we could do otherwise, as though having an axiom at the bottom here makes this unscientific. Every science is based on similar axioms that can't justify themselves. So take, for example, assuming that the universe is intelligible, right? Assuming that 2 + 2 makes 4 for every 2 and 2. You know, if it works for apples, it works for oranges, it's also going to work for cantaloupes. How do you know it's going to work for ravens and chickens? And how does it generalize? That's an intuition.